started with a rumor, one of those whispers you hear in passing that stick to your brain like glue, even though you wish they wouldn't. 2 weeks ago, I'd run into an old friend, Brian, at the gym. We weren't especially close, but we'd always gotten along. After some small talk about bench presses and our shared hatred for morning alarms, his tone shifted. "Hey, Alex, you know that guy Richardson? Megan's boss." I raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, what about him?" He hesitated, wiping sweat off his forehead. "He's got a reputation, man, especially with married women. Just, I don't know. Keep your eyes open." That was it. Nothing more. I laughed it off at the time, but on the drive home, those words played on a loop in my mind. Keep your eyes open. Brian wasn't the gossiping type, and the way he said it, like he was trying to warn me without saying too much, bothered me. For the next few days, I couldn't help but notice things. Little things. Megan's late nights, her locked phone, how she started spending a little too much time prepping presentations. I caught her smiling at messages more often than usual, quickly tucking her phone away when I walked in the room. And the perfume. That damned perfume. Megan always wore something light and floral, but lately, there was a heavier scent. Like something a woman wears when she wants to feel dangerous. When I asked her about it, she shrugged and said she got a new bottle from a coworker. "A gift," she said casually. "You don't like it?" I didn't answer because deep down I felt something shifting. Something I didn't want to name. Then came the party. It wasn't just any party. It was Richardson's annual company celebration. Megan had talked about it all week. "It's huge," she kept saying, like it was some kind of Hollywood gala. "The whole office will be there. Alex, it's going to be so much fun." But her eyes betrayed her excitement. There was a kind of hunger in them, a nervous energy. And when I agreed to go, she didn't look happy. She looked surprised. That night, Megan got ready like she was preparing for war. She spent 2 hours in the bathroom, emerging in a crimson dress I hadn't seen before. It was bold, almost too bold, like something a woman wears to get noticed. "You look amazing," I said, and I meant it, but she didn't respond. She just smirked, checking her reflection one last time before grabbing her purse. The party itself was held at Richardson's estate, an obnoxiously massive place with chandeliers bigger than my car and more wine bottles than guests. As we entered, Megan squeezed my arm tightly. I assumed it was affection. Now I realize it was guilt. From the moment we arrived, I felt like I'd walked into a trap. Megan disappeared almost instantly, floating from one group to another like a politician working a room. Every time I caught her eye, she'd flash me a smile so quick and forced, it felt rehearsed. I hung back, watching, observing. It was Richardson who finally came to greet me. He appeared at my side with a glass of whiskey, looking as smug as ever. His tuxedo fit perfectly, his hair slicked back like he belonged on a magazine cover. "Alex, right?" he said, extending a hand. "Megan's husband." He didn't say it like it was a good thing. "That's me," I replied coolly, shaking his hand, though every instinct in my body screamed at me not to. "Lucky man," Richardson added, his tone oozing fake warmth. "Megan's an asset to the company. One of the brightest we've got." I forced a smile. "Yeah, she's a hard worker." He didn't reply, just sipped his drink and looked across the room. I followed his gaze and saw Megan, standing at the far end of the hall, laughing at something some executive had said. Her posture was too relaxed, too familiar. Something inside me shifted. The night dragged on, and Megan avoided me more and more. Every time I approached her, she'd brush me off. "I'm networking," she whispered through gritted teeth at one point. "Stop following me around, Alex. Go enjoy yourself." Enjoy myself? How was I supposed to enjoy myself when I felt like I was being mocked by an entire room? Then came the moment I can't forget. The moment that turned suspicion into cold, hard truth. I'd gone to the restroom trying to shake the fog in my head. On my way back, I passed by a small side corridor. At the end of it was a heavy oak door, slightly cracked open. From inside, I heard laughter, her laughter. Megan's laugh was unmistakable, a melody I used to adore. But this time it sounded wrong. I don't know what compelled me to look. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was madness. But I crept toward the door, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. And when I peeked through that crack, I saw them. Richardson leaned in too close, his hand resting on Megan's waist as she tilted her head back, smiling at him like he was the only man on earth. He whispered something into her ear, and she laughed softly, resting her hand on his chest. For a second, I thought I was hallucinating. Then Richardson leaned in further, his lips brushing against her cheek before he moved to kiss her. And Megan didn't pull away. She didn't flinch. She kissed him back. I stepped backward, feeling like someone had kicked the air out of my lungs. My hands shook, and my face burned with shame, anger, and disbelief all at once. I couldn't process it. Couldn't believe that the woman I loved, the woman I trusted, was right there, letting herself melt into another man's arms like I didn't exist. I was ready to storm in, to grab Richardson by the collar and drag him out in front of everyone. But then, Megan pulled away just slightly, and I heard her say it. The words I'll never forget. "You're the cuckold worth searching for." I froze. The blood drained from my face. My ears started ringing. I had no idea what she meant by it, but I knew it was meant to humiliate me, to reduce me. I turned around and walked straight out of that house, my hands trembling with a mix of rage and clarity. One thought ran through my head, over and over. She thinks this is a game. She thinks I'm weak. But she was wrong. Dead wrong. I wasn't going to let this slide. Not for a second. And if she wanted to play games, I was ready to play them better than she ever imagined. I don't remember driving home that night. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. But my mind was somewhere else. Looping through what I'd seen, what I'd heard. Megan's voice, sharp and smug, echoed like a bullet in my skull. "You're the cuckold worth searching for." I couldn't even make sense of it. What did she mean? Was it a joke? An inside reference between her and Richardson? Or was it her way of mocking me directly, knowing I'd see her, knowing it would rip me apart? By the time I reached our house, I was numb. I sat in the driveway for a long time, staring at the glow of the streetlights reflecting on the hood of my car. The engine hummed softly, like it was trying to calm me, but there was nothing left to calm. Eventually, I killed the engine and stepped inside. The house was dark and quiet. I sank onto the couch, hands on my knees, feeling like a man who'd just been gutted but somehow managed to keep walking. I didn't know how long I sat there, staring at nothing. When the door finally opened around 2 a.m., the sound of Megan's heels clicking on the tile jolted me out of my trance. She didn't see me at first. She tossed her purse onto the counter, humming softly to herself as she kicked off her shoes. Then she spotted me in the shadows of the living room. Her eyes widened, just for a second, before she smoothed her expression into something neutral. "Oh, you're still up?" she asked, her voice casual, as if she hadn't just kissed her boss at a party, as if I hadn't heard her say the most humiliating words I've ever been handed. I didn't respond. I just watched her, my gaze cold and unmoving. She shifted uncomfortably. "You okay, Alex? Did you have fun tonight?" I finally said. My voice was calm, but I could feel the tension underneath, like a taut wire ready to snap. She hesitated. "Yeah, it was a good night. A lot of important people were there." "Important people like Richardson?" I shot back, my tone sharper than I intended. Her eyes flickered for just a moment, there and gone. But I caught it. She recovered quickly, though, crossing her arms and sighing like I was the one being unreasonable. "Is this what we're doing now? Are you starting fights because I talked to my boss?" "Jesus, Alex, I have to be nice to him. It's work." "You were a little more than nice," I said quietly. Her posture stiffened. "What's that supposed to mean?" I stood up, my movements slow and deliberate, and walked over to her. I stopped just a few feet away, close enough to see the faint smear of lipstick on the edge of her mouth. Richardson's lipstick, not mine. "I saw you, Megan," I said, my voice low. "In the study. With him." Her face went pale, but to her credit, she didn't break. She didn't crumble or stammer. Instead, she tilted her head and raised her chin, like a queen being accused of something beneath her dignity. "And?" she said, a hint of defiance in her voice. The way she said it, and made me want to scream. It was the tone of someone who didn't care, someone who wasn't sorry. "And?" I repeated, incredulous. You're not even going to deny it? She rolled her eyes. Deny what? That I kissed him? Fine. I kissed him. So what? It's not like I'm sleeping with him. The word hit me like a slap. Oh, so now it's just a kiss? I said, my anger boiling over. That's what we're doing now? You're out there kissing your boss in secret rooms? But it's fine because it didn't go further? Do you hear yourself, Megan? She shrugged, her face a mask of indifference. You're overreacting. It was stupid. I'd had too much to drink, and he was charming, okay? It didn't mean anything. You kissed him, I said through gritted teeth. And then you said that to him. She narrowed her eyes. What are you talking about? I stared at her, my jaw tight. You called me a cuckold. Worth searching for. Whatever the hell that's supposed to mean. Her face froze. For the first time, she looked rattled. Like I'd caught her off guard. She didn't speak, didn't move. Where did that come from, Megan? I pressed. Was that something you came up with? Or did Richardson put that idea in your head? Stop! She snapped suddenly, her voice cutting through the silence. You're acting insane. You're twisting this into something it's not. I told you it was nothing. You need to let it go. I laughed bitterly, a sound that felt foreign in my own throat. Let it go? You humiliated me tonight. And you're standing there telling me to let it go. I'm not going to stand here and be interrogated, she said sharply, turning toward the hallway. This conversation is over. I'm tired. And you're being dramatic. She started to walk away. I watched her back as she disappeared into the bedroom, and something inside me shifted. Something fundamental. It was like the last wall holding me together finally cracked and fell. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a drunken mistake. Megan knew what she was doing. And worse, she didn't care. I stood there for a long time in the darkened living room, listening to the faint sounds of her moving around in the bedroom. My mind raced, connecting dots I hadn't seen before. How long had this been going on? How many other mistakes had she made that I didn't know about? Couldn't sleep that night. I sat awake on the couch, staring at the ceiling while a single, ruthless thought solidified in my mind. If Megan wanted to play this game, if she thought she could disrespect me like this and walk away unscathed, she had no idea who she was dealing with. I wasn't going to let it go. Not this time. And I was done being the nice guy. The next morning, the house was silent. I woke up stiff on the couch, the stale bitterness of last night still coating my mouth like ash. Megan was already up, seated at the kitchen island in her silk robe, scrolling through her phone with a steaming cup of coffee beside her. She looked unbothered, as if nothing had happened. For a second, I studied her, really looked at her. She seemed almost proud of herself, smug even. It made my blood simmer. Good morning, she said, not bothering to look up. I ignored her and grabbed a mug, pouring myself a coffee. The silence between us was heavy. I didn't plan to speak first, but of course, she couldn't leave it alone. You're still sulking? She asked, her tone light but laced with something sharper. Come on, Alex. We don't need to make this a bigger deal than it was. I slammed the coffee pot down, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Megan finally looked up, startled. A bigger deal? I said, my voice steady but edged with ice. You kissed your boss and called me a cuckold. Do you even hear yourself? Megan rolled her eyes, that same dismissive move she'd perfected. I told you already it was a stupid joke, a slip-up. I don't even know what you think you heard. Don't know what I think I heard? I repeated, my voice rising slightly. You looked him in the eyes and said it. What kind of joke is that, Megan? She sighed dramatically, setting her phone down as if this conversation was inconveniencing her. Oh my God, Alex, you're acting so insecure right now. You think everything's about you. Newsflash, it's not. The arrogance in her tone hit me square in the chest. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't ashamed. She was talking to me like I was the fool here, like I was the one overstepping. Something snapped in me. You're lying to me, I said flatly. You're lying, and you don't even care that I know it. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping across the floor. I'm done with this conversation. No, I said, stepping in her path as she tried to leave the kitchen. You don't get to walk away again. Not this time. If you're going to disrespect me, at least have the guts to admit it. Her expression darkened. Get out of my way, Alex. And if I don't? I challenged. The stare she gave me was cold, calculating. She didn't say a word, but she didn't need to. The message was clear, you're nothing to me. She brushed past me roughly, her shoulder knocking into mine, and disappeared into the bedroom again. Moments later, I heard the shower running. I sat down heavily, staring at the empty coffee cup in my hands. My heart was pounding, but my mind was crystal clear. Megan had crossed a line, and she wasn't even trying to hide it. This wasn't just about a kiss anymore. This was about her. About the way she looked at me with contempt, as if she'd already made up her mind that I was beneath her. And I realized something then, something I hadn't wanted to admit. I didn't know her anymore. The woman I married, the woman I thought I'd grow old with, she was gone. Replaced by someone who didn't respect me, didn't love me, or maybe she never had. Maybe the signs had been there all along, and I'd been too blind to see them. I stood up and grabbed my keys. I needed out of that house. I drove aimlessly for hours. I couldn't go to work, not like this. My head was a storm, my thoughts racing. But then I remembered Brian. His warning at the gym. Keep your eyes open, man. I parked outside a small diner and pulled out my phone. My hands hovered over the screen before I finally typed, "Hey Brian, you busy?" He replied almost immediately, "Nah, what's up? Can we meet? I need to talk to you. It's about Megan." A few hours later, we were seated in a booth at the back of the diner. Brian was sipping a Coke, studying me carefully. "You look like hell, man," he said. "I feel worse," I replied, staring at the coffee in front of me. "So what happened?" I didn't sugarcoat it. I told him about the party, what I saw, what Megan said. As I spoke, his face turned grim. By the time I finished, he leaned back in his seat, shaking his head. "Damn," he muttered. "I was hoping I was wrong." "What do you mean?" I asked sharply. He hesitated, like he was debating whether or not to tell me. "Look, Alex, Richardson's been pulling this crap for years. He's a snake, always targeting women in the office. Some fall for it, some don't. But Megan—" "What about Megan?" I pressed, my fists clenching under the table. Brian sighed. "I heard she's been spending a lot of time with him lately, going on business trips, late-night meetings. Guys at the office have been talking. I didn't want to say anything because, well, I didn't want to make things worse if I was wrong. But after what you just told me..." The diner suddenly felt too small. The walls seemed to close in on me as his words sank in. "She's been lying to me," I said quietly. Brian nodded. "Look, man, I'm sorry. I really am. But you deserve to know." I stared out the window, my jaw tight. Megan had been making a fool of me for who knows how long, and Richardson, this snake, was right there with her. The anger that simmered inside me began to boil over. But something else rose with it. A sense of cold, calculated resolve. "You okay?" Brian asked cautiously. "Yeah," I said, my voice calm. "I'm good. Thanks for telling me." As I drove home, my plan began to take shape. I wasn't going to confront her again. Not yet. Megan thought she could get away with this because she believed I was weak. She underestimated me. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to cry. No, I was going to make her pay. And when I was done, she'd never see it coming. When I got home that evening, the house was quiet again. Too quiet. Megan was sitting on the couch, laptop open, typing something for work. She barely looked up when I walked in, just threw me the kind of glance you'd give a stranger in line at the grocery store. Detached, distant. "Where have you been?" she asked. Not because she cared, but because she wanted to know if I was checking up on her. "Out," I said, kicking off my shoes. She hummed a vague response and went back to typing, like the night before hadn't happened. Like I hadn't caught her pressed up against her boss in a dark room, saying things that felt like they'd been carved into my skin. My instincts told me to drag her off that couch, to demand answers, to scream the truth back into her face. But I didn't. Instead, I did something Megan never would have expected. I smiled. "You want dinner?" I asked casually. She finally looked up, confused. "What?" "I'm cooking dinner. Steak and potatoes. You want some?" She blinked at me, processing my words like I was speaking another language. "Yeah, sure." And that was the beginning of my act. For the next few days, I played the perfect husband. I smiled when I saw her. I brought her coffee in the mornings, exactly how she liked it. 2 sugars, splash of cream. I kissed her cheek when she left for work, lingering just long enough to make her uncomfortable. She didn't know what to do with me. I could see it in her eyes, the way she watched me like I was some unpredictable animal. Megan expected rage. She expected tears. But what she got was calm, so calm it unnerved her. On Wednesday, she finally cracked. "Are we not going to talk about it?" She blurted out while we were eating dinner. I looked up from my plate, feigning surprise. "Talk about what?" She narrowed her eyes. "The party. You've been acting weird since then." I smiled, slow and deliberate. "Weird? I feel fine. Honestly, I've just been thinking about how lucky I am." "Lucky?" She said the word like it was poison. "To have you," I replied, leaning back in my chair. "I mean, sure, mistakes happen. People slip up. But we're stronger than that, aren't we, Megan?" Her fork paused halfway to her mouth. Her face turned guarded. "Of course," she muttered, quickly looking back down at her plate. And there it was, the first crack in her armor. I spent the next week gathering information. Quietly, methodically. I'd work during the day. Then at night, when Megan thought I was asleep on the couch, I'd dig. I started with her laptop. Her passwords were easy to guess, our wedding date for one, the name of her favorite author for another. Emails, messages, calendar invites. At first, it was all work-related, nothing concrete. But then I found it. An email chain between Megan and Richardson. It wasn't overly romantic, no declarations of love, no X's and O's, but it didn't need to be. The language was coded, but obvious enough. Richardson. "Looking forward to our meeting Friday night. I'll bring the wine. You bring yourself. Megan. You're impossible." Winky face. "But yes, I'll be there." It was dated the week before the party. So this wasn't a one-time slip-up. This wasn't just a kiss. Megan had been seeing him, sneaking around behind my back with a man who had probably pulled this same move on a dozen other women. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark, feeling that same cold, razor-sharp clarity settle over me. The truth wasn't just ugly, it was insulting. She hadn't just disrespected me. She'd underestimated me, and I was done pretending to be blind. Friday arrived, and I knew Megan had plans. She didn't even bother to hide it. "I'll be working late," she said that morning as she fixed her hair in the mirror. "Big presentation coming up. Don't wait up." Her voice was casual, but I caught the faint flicker of guilt in her reflection. She knew she was lying, and for a brief moment, I wondered if she liked it. If the thrill of sneaking around was part of the appeal. "That's fine," I replied, slipping my hands into my pockets. "I've got things to keep me busy." She glanced at me, suspicious. "What kind of things?" "Just errands." I smiled. "You know me, always productive." She didn't push it. She just grabbed her bag, kissed my cheek like nothing was wrong, and walked out the door. The second she was gone, I sprang into action. I grabbed my keys and drove straight to Brian's office downtown. He was waiting for me in the lobby, already looking uneasy. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked as I approached. "Absolutely," I replied. Brian sighed. "All right, I've got a guy, private investigator. Friend of mine. He's discreet and damn good at what he does." He handed me a card with a name and number. I stared at it for a moment, the weight of what I was about to do settling on my shoulders. "Thanks, Brian," I said. "Just don't do anything stupid, okay?" he warned. I didn't respond. Instead, I turned and walked out of the building, dialing the number on the card as I went. That evening, Megan texted me around 7:30 p.m. "Working late. I'll probably stay at a hotel near the office. Don't worry about me." The audacity. I stared at the message for a moment, my lip curling into a humorless smile. "No problem. Be safe," I replied. Then I turned off my phone and waited. It didn't take long for the investigator to send me what I needed. By 9 p.m., I had photos in my inbox. Megan and Richardson, arm in arm, entering a luxury hotel downtown, smiling, laughing. Her crimson dress, the same one from the party, hugged her figure like a sick reminder. I sat there in the dark living room, the glow of the screen lighting my face as I studied each picture. Richardson's hand on her waist, Megan looking up at him like he was some kind of god. I felt nothing. No shock. No pain. Just cold, ruthless determination. The game was on now. Megan had no idea, but she'd handed me everything I needed. And soon, she'd understand just how dangerous it was to underestimate a man with nothing left to lose. You're the cuckold worth searching for. Not anymore to be wise Saturday morning. I had everything I needed. Proof, timing, and an unstoppable resolve. Megan hadn't come home. She'd sent a half-hearted text at 11 p.m. the night before saying, "Late meeting turned into dinner. Staying at the hotel. I'll see you tomorrow. Love you. Love you." Two meaningless words tacked on like cheap duct tape over a shattered window. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Instead, I sat at the dining table, staring at the steaming cup of coffee in front of me. My thoughts were razor-sharp now. Megan thought she had me wrapped around her finger, like some obedient fool who'd look the other way while she desecrated our marriage. But the truth was, she wasn't even in the game anymore. I'd already taken control. The first piece of my plan required the man Megan had underestimated most, me. I spent the morning visiting a lawyer, Jennifer McLean, a sharp divorce attorney who'd come highly recommended by Brian. She had the kind of steely confidence that could rip someone to shreds in court while wearing a smile. "So, what's your situation?" she asked, leaning forward as I sat across from her desk. I slid the folder of photos, receipts, and printed emails toward her. "My wife is having an affair. I have proof." Jennifer flipped through the folder, her expression unchanging, calm, professional, but her eyes gleamed with understanding. "This is solid. Very solid. You're documenting all of this?" "Yes," I replied. "I've started gathering everything: bank statements, phone records, hotel receipts. I want her cornered." Jennifer nodded approvingly. "Good. You're being smart. Do you have joint assets?" I thought about the house, the savings account, the car we shared. "Yes, but I don't care about the money. I just want the truth exposed. I want her to know she didn't win." Jennifer smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised how often I hear that. Don't worry, Mr. Carson. By the time I'm done, she won't see it coming." I shook her hand, my grip firm. "Let's get started." The second piece of my plan required timing. Megan's world, her carefully constructed facade, depended on one thing: secrecy. She thought no one knew. Not her friends, not her coworkers, not me. But what would happen if that secrecy disappeared? By late afternoon, I had a group chat open on my phone. It included several people, Megan's closest friends, her colleagues, and Brian. I carefully composed a message, taking my time to make sure it was perfect. "Hi everyone. I'm reaching out because there's something you should know. Megan and her boss, Mark Richardson, have been having an affair behind my back. I've tried addressing this privately, but she refuses to admit the truth. I'm sharing this because I believe people deserve to know who they're dealing with." Attached to the message were the photos from the private investigator. Megan and Richardson entering the hotel, arms wrapped around each other like giddy teenagers. I hovered over the send button, my thumb trembling slightly. Not from fear, but from anticipation. Megan had been playing her game for months. It was only fair I returned the favor. I hit send. There was no going back now. That evening, Megan waltzed into the house just after 7 p.m., wearing the same crimson dress she'd worn to Richardson's party. She looked flawless, as if she'd just stepped out of a magazine spread. Her makeup was still perfect, her smile easy and relaxed. "Hey," she said as she tossed her keys onto the counter. "Long day." She kissed me on the cheek, the nerve of her, and then walked straight to the kitchen. "I'm starving. Want me to order something? Chinese?" I didn't say a word. I sat on the couch, staring at the phone in my hand, waiting. She must have felt my silence because she turned, looking at me. "Alex." I raised my eyes slowly to meet hers. I could see the flicker of confusion behind her perfect smile, the faint unease that rippled across her face. "You okay?" she asked. My phone buzzed in my hand. Then it buzzed again, and again. Megan's phone, still in her purse, started vibrating too. Rapid-fire notifications, one after the other, filling the room with a chorus of buzzing and dings. Her face froze. "What's that?" she muttered, pulling her phone out. I watched her expression shift in real time. First confusion, then disbelief, and finally panic. Her hands started shaking as she scrolled through her messages. What is this?" she choked out. I stood up slowly, walking toward her with measured steps. "Something wrong, Megan?" She looked at me, her face pale. "What did you do?" I shrugged, calm as ever. "I let people know the truth. Isn't that what you always say? Honesty matters." Her voice cracked. You sent this to everyone?" "Not everyone," I replied. "Just the people who matter to you. Your friends, your coworkers. I figured they deserved to know what kind of woman you are." Her breathing quickened, panic flashing across her face. "You've ruined me," she whispered, her voice shaking. I stepped closer, towering over her as she clutched her phone like it might save her. "No, Megan, you ruined yourself. I just turned on the lights so everyone else could see it." She collapsed onto one of the dining chairs, burying her face in her hands. "Why would you do this? Why couldn't you just let it go?" I leaned down so we were eye to eye, my voice low and cold. "Because you thought I was weak. You thought you could humiliate me and get away with it. But now you know the truth. I'm not the man you thought I was." Her phone buzzed again, and I could see the notifications piling up on her screen. Messages from her friends, from coworkers. Some shocked, others judgmental. "You'll regret this," she hissed suddenly, lifting her head to glare at me, tears streaking her mascara. I smiled, slow and deliberate. "No, Megan. You're the one who's going to regret this." I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her sitting there, small, shattered, and alone. For the first time in months, I felt free. This wasn't over. Not yet. But Megan had just learned the first rule of betrayal. Don't underestimate the man you think you've broken. The next morning, Megan's carefully curated world crumbled. I woke up early, refreshed for the first time in months. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the central air. Megan's side of the bed was empty. She hadn't come upstairs last night. Not that I cared. I walked downstairs to find her curled up on the living room couch. She looked like a shadow of herself. Her makeup from the night before was smeared across her face, and her phone lay on the coffee table next to her, its screen still lighting up with constant notifications. I watched her for a moment, arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to shrink into nothing. She didn't notice me until I spoke. "Rough night." Her head snapped up, eyes red and puffy. She looked at me with an expression that teetered between rage and despair. "What the hell did you do, Alex?" I crossed my arms, leaning casually against the doorframe. "You mean what you did?" "I just let people know." She shot up from the couch, her movements frantic and angry. "You think this is funny? You think you're going to come out of this looking good? Everyone is talking about me, Alex. Everyone. My friends, my coworkers. Do you know how many calls I've had from the office? People are laughing at me." "Good," I said simply, refusing to blink. She recoiled like I'd slapped her, her jaw trembling. "You don't even care what you've done to our lives. Your life too. You look insane." I smiled faintly. "Insane? No, Megan. I look like a man who finally stood up for himself. There's a difference." "You ruined me," she screamed, her voice breaking. I didn't flinch. "No, Megan. You ruined yourself the second you decided that lying, sneaking around, and humiliating me was worth it. You chose this. I just helped you face the consequences." She sank back onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. For a moment, the room fell into silence except for her shallow, ragged breathing. When she looked back up, the rage was gone, replaced by something colder, calculating. "This isn't over," she said in a low voice. "I'll tell everyone you're crazy, that you made all of this up." "You think anyone will believe you?" I asked, pulling my phone from my pocket. "I have the emails, the photos, the receipts. You can spin your stories all you want, Megan, but the truth is out. And Richardson," I chuckled darkly. "He won't be coming to save you. Men like him cut ties the second a scandal makes things messy." Her face paled, and I knew the truth had finally landed. By lunchtime, the fallout had begun to ripple outward. Megan locked herself in the bedroom, but I could hear snippets of her frantic phone calls through the door. She was trying to do damage control, to cling to whatever threads of her reputation she had left. I heard her begging someone, probably Richardson, on the other end of the line. "Mark, you need to fix this. No, you don't understand. This is my career. I can't lose this job, Mark. Do something." I thought. Trouble in paradise. The first of Megan's friends began to reach out to me shortly after. I let the calls go to voicemail, but I read the texts as they came in. "Claire, Alex, is this true? Megan?" I don't even know what to say. "Brian, dude, it's blowing up at her office. Richardson got called into HR this morning. They're investigating him." Investigating him. Good. That meant Richardson's Golden Boy act was starting to crack. Megan had hitched her wagon to a man whose reputation could barely survive the first gust of wind. I spent the afternoon in quiet satisfaction, knowing exactly how this would play out. Megan would fight, claw, and beg to keep everything she'd built. But the truth was a fire that couldn't be put out once it started spreading. And I'd lit the match. By evening, the bedroom door finally creaked open. Megan stepped out, her face drained of color, her movements stiff. She'd changed into sweatpants and a hoodie, her armor was gone. "Can we talk?" she muttered quietly. I raised an eyebrow but didn't respond. She walked over to the dining table and sat down across from me, folding her hands like a kid waiting for a scolding. "Alex," she started, her voice hoarse. "I messed up. I know I messed up. Okay? But all of this, it's gone too far." I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms. "Define too far, Megan. Was it when you kissed your boss? Or when you decided I was a golden retriever who wouldn't find out?" She flinched at my words. "I was stupid. I wasn't thinking. It didn't mean anything." "Didn't mean anything?" I repeated slowly. "So you throw our marriage away, humiliate me in front of everyone we know, and it doesn't mean anything? That's your excuse." Her eyes darted away from mine. I don't want to lose everything, Alex. You have to stop this. Call people. Tell them it's not what it looks like." I laughed. Actually laughed. "You want me to clean up your mess? Megan, you're unbelievable." "I can fix this," she pressed, her voice rising with desperation. "We can fix this. Just tell me what you want. Do you want me to quit my job? Fine, I'll quit. Do you want me to cut contact with Mark? I'll do it. I'll do whatever you want, Alex. Please." I studied her as she spoke, watching the cracks in her mask widen. For the first time, Megan wasn't the one in control. She was begging me, begging. It should have felt satisfying, but instead, all I felt was emptiness. "I don't want anything from you," I said quietly. Her eyes snapped up to mine. "What?" "I don't want you to quit your job. I don't want you to fix this. And I sure as hell don't want to pretend that any of this can be salvaged." I stood up slowly, looming over her as she shrank into her chair. "We're done, Megan. I already filed the divorce papers." Her face went blank. You what?" "I filed," I repeated coldly. "I'm done being your backup plan, your loyal little golden retriever. You wanted a game, Megan? You played yourself." Her lip trembled. "Alex, please, don't do this." I turned my back to her, already walking toward the stairs. "You did this to yourself. Now you can live with it." Behind me, I heard the faint, shuddering sound of her starting to cry. For a moment, I paused at the top of the stairs, but I didn't turn around. Megan's tears weren't mine to comfort anymore. She thought she could shatter me, humiliate me, reduce me to nothing. But she'd forgotten one simple truth. Sometimes the quiet ones hit the hardest. And I just delivered the knockout punch that I woke up the next morning to the faint sounds of Megan pacing back and forth downstairs. Her voice rose and fell in frantic bursts. Another phone call. It wasn't hard to guess who she was talking to. I took my time getting ready, the weight that had clung to me for months finally lifting. Megan was unraveling, and for once, I didn't feel like a man on the edge. I felt steady, solid, in control. By the time I walked downstairs, Megan was off the phone and sitting at the kitchen table. She looked like she hadn't slept a minute, her hair messy, her face pale, her eyes red from crying. She had a cup of coffee clutched in her hands, staring blankly into it like the solution to her problems might surface in the foam. She didn't even look up when I entered the room. "Morning," I said casually, heading for the fridge. Her voice came out brittle. Alex, I need to talk to you. I pulled out the carton of milk and set it on the counter. About what? She finally looked at me, her expression a mix of anger and desperation. Richardson, you did something, didn't you? I didn't answer right away. I calmly poured milk into my coffee and stirred, savoring the silence. What makes you think I did something? I asked, taking a sip. Her hands tightened around her mug. He's in trouble. Real trouble. HR suspended him this morning pending a full investigation. They think he's been inappropriate with employees. I didn't say anything, Alex, but someone must have. I leaned against the counter, watching her with the faintest hint of a smile. Maybe he's just finally getting what he deserves. Her eyes narrowed. You did this. You set him up. I shrugged. I didn't set him up, Megan. I just told the truth. That's a lie. She shot back, her voice trembling with rage. You knew exactly what would happen. You knew his reputation would explode. And why is that my problem? I said, my tone icy. He kissed a married woman at a work event, Megan. He's been sleeping with someone who works directly for him. I didn't make him do those things. I just exposed it. Her face contorted, and for a moment, she looked like she might throw the coffee mug at me. Instead, she slammed it down on the table, spilling its contents everywhere. You've ruined everything, she hissed. Do you know how hard I worked for that job? For that reputation? You think you're the good guy here, Alex? You're not. You're pathetic. I didn't flinch. I just looked at her, calm and unbothered. No, Megan. What's pathetic is a woman who cheats on her husband and then blames him when her lies fall apart. Her jaw snapped shut, her face flushing red. She stood abruptly, shaking with anger, but I wasn't afraid. Megan's fury no longer had any power over me. She stormed out of the kitchen, grabbing her keys from the counter as she left. The door slammed behind her so hard the walls seemed to shake. I stood there for a long moment, the silence that followed ringing in my ears like victory. That afternoon, I got a call from Brian. You're not going to believe this, he said, his voice buzzing with energy. Richardson just got fired. I blinked, though I wasn't surprised. That was fast. HR didn't waste any time, Brian said. Turns out they dug into his emails, expense reports, the whole thing. Apparently, he's been using company money to wine and dine other women for years. Your photos were just the cherry on top. I almost laughed. Richardson, the smug, arrogant snake who had ruined my marriage, had just watched his entire life collapse in record time. What about Megan? I asked, curious. Brian paused. Well, she's in trouble too, man. She's not fired yet, but they've pulled her off her projects. Word is, she's going to have to explain her role in all this to the board. I felt nothing. No pity, no guilt. Megan had been complicit in the mess Richardson had created. If she thought she could play in the mud without getting dirty, she'd been fooling herself. Brian spoke again, his voice quieter. What's next for you, Alex? You holding up? I exhaled slowly, staring out the window. The world outside looked brighter somehow, like I was seeing it through new eyes. I'm good, Brian, I said. Better than I've been in a long time. Megan came home late that night. I was sitting in the living room with the TV on, flipping through channels without really watching anything. When the door opened, I glanced over to see her standing there, her shoulders slumped, her expression hollow. She looked defeated. Dinner's in the fridge, I said, turning back to the screen. She didn't move. Alex, she said quietly. What? She stepped inside, closing the door behind her, and leaned back against it like she might collapse. I lost everything today. I muted the TV, looking at her with a blank expression. Not everything. You still have Richardson. Her face twisted, and for the first time, I saw tears start to well in her eyes. No, I don't. He's gone, Alex. He cut me off. He won't even take my calls. I didn't respond. I just stared at her, letting the silence hang heavy in the air. Megan took a shaky breath, her voice breaking. I know you hate me. I know I screwed up. But please, I need you. I need us to fix this. The audacity of it stunned me, as if there was still an us. You need me? I said softly, That's funny. Last week you didn't need me at all. I was just the golden retriever. Remember? Loyal, stupid, obedient. She opened her mouth to speak, but I raised my hand, stopping her. No, Megan. We're done. The divorce papers are filed. You'll get your half of the house, half of our savings, whatever the lawyers decide is fair. But me? You don't get me anymore. Her tears finally fell, sliding down her face. Alex, please. I don't have anyone else. That's not my problem, I said coldly. I stood up, grabbing my keys from the table and brushing past her on my way to the door. For the first time in years, I felt light, unburdened. Megan might have thought she could manipulate me, cheat on me, and walk away unscathed. But now she was the one left alone in the wreckage. As I stepped outside, the night air felt cool against my face. I stared up at the stars and smiled faintly to myself. She thought she broke me. She didn't realize I was already rebuilding. The next morning, the house felt different. Emptier, quieter, like it was holding its breath. Megan's car was still in the driveway, but I didn't hear her moving around. Maybe she'd stayed in bed all night, curled up in the same shame she thought I'd wear forever. I didn't care. I had other plans. I walked into the kitchen and grabbed my phone. I needed to tie up one last loose end, and that meant a final conversation. The call rang twice before a calm, familiar voice answered. Mark Richardson. There he was, the man who had turned my life upside down. I imagined him in his overpriced suit, sitting in his sterile office, or what was left of it. Mark, I said smoothly. It's Alex Carson. There was a pause, a long one, then a cautious. Alex, what can I do for you? You know what you can do, Mark, I said, leaning against the counter, my voice low and steady. You can finally admit you're a fraud. Another pause. I could almost hear him choosing his words carefully, like he was walking a minefield. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you do, I replied. You lost your job, didn't you? Your little kingdom collapsed because you couldn't keep your hands to yourself. His voice sharpened. Listen to me, Carson. If you think you're going to... I don't think anything, I interrupted coldly. You know what's sad, Mark? You weren't even special. You were a pathetic middle-aged man who thought he could take something that didn't belong to him. You didn't just humiliate me. You humiliated yourself. And now, you're just another cautionary tale. He didn't respond. He couldn't. I let the silence hang for a beat longer. I hope it was worth it, Mark. And then I hung up. That was all he deserved. By the time I stepped out of the shower an hour later, I heard Megan moving around upstairs. I found her in the bedroom, shoving clothes into a suitcase. The sound of zippers, hangers clattering, and fabric being yanked from drawers filled the room like some chaotic symphony. Going somewhere? I asked, toweling off my hair. She didn't look at me. I'm leaving, at least for now. There it was, the final act. She was wearing old jeans and a sweatshirt, clothes that didn't fit her usual polished aesthetic. She looked tired, like the weight of the past week had finally broken her. And maybe it had. I think that's a good idea, I said calmly. It'll give us both space to move on. She froze mid-motion. Her hands gripping a sweater like it was the only thing holding her together. Is that what you want? For me to leave? I met her gaze, unflinching. What I want doesn't matter anymore. You made this decision for both of us the moment you betrayed me. Her face crumpled slightly, but she swallowed it down. I didn't want this, Alex. I never wanted it to end like this. Maybe you should have thought about that before you kissed him, I said evenly, folding my arms. Before you called me a cuckold worth searching for. The words hit her like a physical blow. She staggered slightly, her eyes glassy. I didn't mean it, she whispered. It was stupid. I was stupid. I didn't let her off the hook. Stupid? No, Megan. It was cruel. You mocked me. You enjoyed humiliating me. And for what? For Richardson? A man who dropped you the second his life got messy. She looked down at her shoes, silent. I took a slow step forward, my voice steady. Here's the truth, Megan. You didn't just ruin our marriage. You ruined you. The person I loved, the person I thought you were, doesn't exist anymore. So yeah, you should leave. Her tears finally spilled over, falling in silent tracks down her cheeks. But I didn't feel pity, not anymore. Megan zipped up her suitcase and grabbed the handle. For a moment, she just stood there, looking at me like she was searching for something. Maybe an ounce of forgiveness, maybe a reason to stay. She didn't find it. With one last shaky breath, she turned and walked out of the room. I heard the sound of her suitcase wheels rolling across the tile, the front door opening, and then finally the heavy click of it closing. The silence that followed was deafening. I sat down on the edge of the bed and let out a slow, steady breath. For months, I'd been drowning, smothered by lies, betrayal, and humiliation. Megan's words, her actions, her choices had been weights around my ankles, dragging me deeper into the dark. But now, the house was empty. The air felt clearer. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was sinking anymore. I picked up my phone and texted Brian. "She's gone." His reply came almost instantly. "How do you feel?" I stared at the screen for a moment before replying, "Lighter." That evening, I sat on the back porch with a beer in hand, watching the sun disappear over the horizon. The sky was painted in deep purples and reds, like the last moments of a fire before it burns out completely. And that's what this was, a fire that had burned too hot for too long. Megan's betrayal had scorched everything around it, leaving nothing but ash. But that was okay, because fires don't just destroy, they clear the way for something new. As the last of the light faded, I thought about the man I used to be, the man Megan had mocked, the golden retriever who trusted too much, gave too much, and expected so little in return. That man was gone now, and in his place was someone stronger, sharper, someone who knew his worth. Megan had thought she could break me. She thought she could turn me into a shell of a man who would beg for her to stay. But I hadn't broken. I'd rebuilt. The following week was a blur of logistics. Lawyers, emails, agreements. Megan's absence made the house feel unfamiliar, as if I were living in the remnants of someone else's life. But the quiet was something I welcomed. She was gone for now. I knew she'd fight the divorce tooth and nail, but that was a problem for another day. I sat in my office one evening, the desk cluttered with paperwork, staring at the half-empty glass of bourbon in my hand. It was late, and the shadows outside swallowed everything except the faint glow of streetlights. My phone buzzed, pulling me out of my thoughts. Unknown number. I frowned and answered. "Hello." There was a pause, breathing on the other end. Then a familiar, oily voice. "Alex." It was Richardson. I didn't respond right away. I let his name hang there, the silence dragging until it became uncomfortable. "What do you want, Mark?" I finally said, my voice low and even. "I think we need to talk," he replied, attempting a calm tone, though I could hear the strain behind it. "Man to man." I nearly laughed. "Man to man? That's rich coming from you." "I'm serious," he said tightly. "Look, you've made your point. You won. Fine. But you're not thinking about the consequences, Alex. Megan's career? Mine? This doesn't just hurt us. It's going to blow back on you too. You think anyone's going to see you as a hero for this? You think I care about what people think?" I shot back. "Mark, you cheated with my wife. You didn't just cross a line, you obliterated it. And now you're crawling to me because you're scared." "It wasn't personal," Richardson said after a beat, though his voice had lost some of its confidence. "Not personal?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You kissed my wife, took her to hotels, and treated me like a goddamn joke. And you want me to believe it wasn't personal? Get off my phone, Mark." I hung up before he could respond, but my hands were shaking. Not with fear, but with pure electric adrenaline. The audacity of the man. He wasn't calling to apologize. He was calling to save himself. For the first time since this all began, I let myself laugh. Richardson, the so-called untouchable executive, was scrambling. Megan was probably doing the same thing, clawing at whatever scraps of her old life she could still hold on to. And me? I was standing tall while they both fell apart. That night, I dug deeper into Richardson's downfall. A few calls to Brian confirmed that the investigation into his conduct wasn't slowing down. Apparently, Megan wasn't the first woman Richardson had mentored into his hotel suites. HR had found enough dirt on him to bury his career for good. "You might have done the company a favor," Brian said over the phone. "A guy like him doesn't change." "Yeah, I replied. Shame it took this long. Speaking of Megan, Brian hesitated. She's still showing up to the office, but people aren't talking to her much. Word got around Alex. She's isolated herself. For a moment, I felt a flicker of something. Was it guilt? No, it wasn't guilt. It was recognition. Megan had gambled everything, her career, her reputation, because she thought she could have it all. Richardson was her golden ticket to something bigger, but she didn't realize she was just another piece on his chessboard. And now she was alone. I expected Megan to stay gone, but on Thursday evening, she came back. Not to live here, no, I knew that was over. She came back to confront me. I was in the garage organizing tools I never really used when the door opened, and there she was. She looked like hell, pale, worn out, dark circles under her eyes. Her usual confidence was nowhere to be seen. Alex, she said softly. I didn't look up. You shouldn't be here. I just need to talk to you. You've said enough. Please, she whispered, her voice cracking. Just give me 5 minutes. I set the wrench down slowly, then turned to face her. Fine. 5 minutes. She swallowed hard, as if gathering herself. I'm sorry, she said, her voice trembling. I know you hate me, and I know I deserve it, but I'm lost. Alex, I don't know how to fix this. I studied her carefully. You can't fix this, and you don't get to say you're sorry now. You had chances, so many chances, to tell me the truth. Instead, you let it blow up in your face. I didn't think you'd ever find out, she admitted weakly, staring at the ground. And that's the problem, isn't it? I said coldly. You didn't think I was smart enough to see through you. You didn't think I was strong enough to do something about it. But now you're here because you finally realized that I'm not the fool you thought I was. She flinched at my words, tears pooling in her eyes. It wasn't all a lie, Alex. I loved you. I still love you. I laughed bitterly. You don't love me, Megan. You love the idea of me. You love the safety, the comfort. But the second you had a chance to chase something shinier, you didn't hesitate. That's not love. She wiped her face with the sleeve of her jacket, her voice breaking again. I don't know who I am without you. For a moment, I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness. Just clarity. That's not my problem anymore. Alex, please. I'm done, Megan, I said firmly, cutting her off. You need to leave. There's nothing here for you anymore. Her lips quivered, but she nodded slowly, like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Goodbye, Alex, she whispered, her voice hollow. She turned and walked out of the garage, the door closing behind her with a quiet finality. I watched her go, feeling an unexpected sense of peace settle over me. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't triumph. It was closure. Megan's chapter in my life was over. That night, I sat on the porch again, staring up at the stars. The house behind me felt different now, lighter. I had spent so much time trying to hold on to something that wasn't real, a marriage that had rotted beneath the surface long before I'd seen it. But I'd survived, and I'd learned something Megan never would. When you hit rock bottom, you don't stay there, you rebuild. In a strange way, I felt grateful. Her betrayal had broken me open, but instead of falling apart, I'd found something stronger inside. For the first time in a long time, I knew exactly who I was. And Megan? She would be nothing but a memory soon. Another scar I'd wear proudly as proof that I'd survived. Tomorrow was a new day, and I was ready for it. The final day I thought of Megan arrived unexpectedly, like the first breeze of spring after a brutal winter. It wasn't anything dramatic. No phone calls, no shouting matches, no sobbing goodbyes. Instead, it was a quiet morning. The kind where you wake up to sunlight spilling across your sheets and realize the weight that's been pressing down on your chest is simply gone. I rolled out of bed and stretched, feeling my muscles loosen, my body lighter. The house was silent, but it was the good kind of silence, peaceful, earned. I wandered into the kitchen and brewed my coffee, letting the rich aroma flood the space that Megan's absence had left behind. Somewhere during the last few weeks, I'd reclaimed this house, reclaimed myself. The divorce had gone smoother than I'd expected. Megan didn't fight it, not really. Maybe she was too tired, or maybe she'd realized there was nothing left to salvage. We split our assets cleanly, the lawyers exchanged a few sharp words on our behalf, and that was that. She moved into a small apartment downtown, and Richardson's name disappeared from any mention around town like a stain scrubbed clean. I heard rumors. How Megan was keeping to herself, how Richardson had resigned and relocated to another city to escape the scandal. It didn't matter to me anymore. Their lives were no longer my concern. For the first time in years, I had no one to answer to but myself. That morning, as I sat on the back porch with my coffee in hand, I let my thoughts drift. The sun warmed my face. The air smelled like fresh grass and spring flowers. And for once, I wasn't reliving what had happened. I wasn't replaying the party, or the kiss, or those cruel words Megan had said. "You're the cuckold worth searching for." I smiled faintly at the memory now, not because it didn't hurt, of course it hurt, but because I had survived it. I had taken the humiliation, the anger, and the betrayal, and I had turned them into something else. I wasn't the man Megan thought she could break. I wasn't the golden retriever who would stay loyal no matter how deeply she sunk the knife. I had let her go. Brian showed up later that afternoon, uninvited but welcome. He had a habit of knocking once before letting himself in, claiming I never locked the door. Today was no different. "You know one of these days you're going to get robbed," he joked as he plopped down on my couch. I shrugged. "Let them try. They'll leave disappointed." He grinned and tossed me a beer, cracking one open for himself. "So, how's it feel? You're officially free. Divorce finalized, house to yourself, no more Megan." I took a sip and thought about it. "It feels good, like starting over." Brian raised his beer. "Here's to new beginnings, then." "To new beginnings," I echoed, clinking my bottle against his. We sat there for a while, the TV playing some forgettable game in the background while the late afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows. For once, I didn't feel bitter. I didn't feel hollow. I just felt alive. Later that evening, after Brian left, I grabbed a box from the garage labeled Old Stuff and carried it to the living room. It was filled with remnants of my life with Megan. Photos, trinkets, little tokens that once held meaning. I hadn't touched it since the day she walked out, but now it felt like the right time. One by one, I sorted through the memories. There was a photo of us at a beach, her smiling, me grinning like a fool. I stared at it for a moment before tossing it into the trash bag at my feet. Gone. The anniversary cards with "Forever" written in cursive? Trash. The trinket she bought me on our first vacation together? Trash. I didn't stop until the box was empty, until the weight of our shared history had been packed up and carried to the curb, ready for tomorrow's garbage collection. When I was done, I sat back on the couch, staring at the clean space where the box had been. It was like ripping out a thorn that had been buried too deep. Painful but necessary. A few days later, I found myself at a small coffee shop downtown. It wasn't anything fancy, just one of those places with mismatched chairs, chalkboard menus, and the smell of fresh pastries wafting through the air. I had my laptop open, working on a new project for work, when someone caught my eye. She was sitting by the window, a book in her hand and a faint smile playing on her lips. Her dark hair fell in loose waves over her shoulders, and she looked so genuinely content that it was impossible not to notice. I didn't approach her, didn't say a word, but I smiled to myself as I watched her for a moment before returning to my work, because that's what this was now, a new chapter, a life where I wasn't weighed down by betrayal or bitterness, where I wasn't someone's backup plan or second choice, a life where I could be me. That night, as I sat on my porch again, a cool breeze rolling through, I let the quiet settle deep in my bones. Megan was gone. Richardson was nothing but a memory. The anger and humiliation they'd caused me had burned away, leaving only lessons in their place. I wasn't the man I had been before all of this. That man was gone. But I liked who I was now. Someone stronger, sharper, unshakable. As I looked out at the darkening sky, I smiled to myself. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is exactly what you need to set yourself free. And I was free. Finally free.